He's going to be our first speaker in the new year. Okay, so we look forward to seeing him then. Okay, what is ions? And I'm going to say something about ions each time we have a meeting, just even if you've heard it before, because I think it's so important. Ions is about our human potential and what connects us as a species. When I say it's about our human potential, it's about furthering our human potential. It's about fostering our human potential. It's about us growing to our highest level. And how can we do that individually and collectively and bring that energy together? And that's what ions is really about. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that more this evening as we speak with Karen and Chuck, because they've actually spoken with Edgar Mitchell on several occasions, and so we have some insight that they're going to share with us about that. But he's the gentleman that really spawned the genesis of ions back in 1973, I believe. That was 2 years after he went to the moon on Apollo 14. And again, we'll hear more about that. Do we have any questions at this point in time before we get into our program? Okay, well, again, welcome. I am delighted to have Chuck and Karen Robison as our guests this evening. This is a little different because we usually don't have an interview in ION. We usually have a guest presenter. But Karen and Chuck's format, when they have their programs, they interview people. And so I said to Chuck and Karen, I said, well, why don't we do just that? Why don't I interview y'all and we'll just kind of turn the table. So they thought that was a great idea. So that's what we're going to do this evening. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their program called What If It Really Works? And I get a lot of question about that. You know, people ask me, well, what is that? What if it really works? And I you know, that really is a great question, because a name of an outfit that has a question mark at the end of it. But I think y'all gonna have a great answer as to what that really is. So without further ado, we're gonna start the interview right now. This is a conversation with Chuck and Karen Robison.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay. All right, let's see if we can get this mic to work. I'm only going to use this mic because of recording purposes, because otherwise I think you can hear my voice, although I am struggling a little bit with my allergies, so just kind of bear with me if you don't mind. Well, you know, Chuck and Karen, as I mentioned, I get this question asked me all the time. Is, well, what if it really works? So let's just dive right into that. Give us a sense, let us know what if it really works, and what was the genesis behind that coming to being?
Well, I'll start with what it is. It is whatever we're talking about, whatever new information we're bringing from whatever teachers or scientists that we're talking to. It's like, if you hear it, does it work for you? It's not about, you know, so what if it really works? Because if you don't try it, you won't ever know. And there's so much more information available to us in this day and age than we've ever had, ever, that is accessible so easily. And we've been recording all of these interviews. We started out doing it as an audio interview, and we were on NPR radio in Telluride, Colorado. And then when we moved to Austin, we said, you know, it's time to go and start doing this as a video program. So that's when we started. That was 2006. And we've been doing this 15 years now. So it's been fun. We've traveled a lot because we've interviewed a lot of people that were in other places. But we decided it was time to kind of stay home and interview. There's so much talent in this area that it was better to focus on all the talent that was around us. So.
Yeah, when people ask me what we do, I say what sounds obvious to me, but frequently is like brother from another planet talk. But I say that we are interview people at the juncture where new science, new spirituality, and consciousness studies come together. So that's really what we're focused on. And having done this for 15 years as this, and 20 years before that as something else, the idea that everybody doesn't know about consciousness is how come? Because it's such a common thing to the way we think and the way what we deal with. But I promise you, it is a brand new idea. And it's wound up with quantum everything. And 100 years ago, one of the great physicists discovered that using the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, if you just peek inside of an experiment, you change the outcome. And he went on to say, this reveals the most powerful force that we know. And yet for 100 years, science absolutely turned and ran every time they heard that, because they didn't know how to deal with it, and they still don't, but they're trying. So we feel like that we feel like we're still on the front edge of this wave, and we love being there, but after a while you begin to think everybody should know what this is about. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to help people get to thinking about this. So that's what I think we're doing.
Very good. Because we have a small audience this evening, I think we have plenty of time. Let me just drill down a little bit. With respect to you and Karen getting together back in, I think, 2002 when y'all first met, what transpired that brought about the genesis of What If It Really Works? Was there like a specific event and a light bulb went off and you said, wow, we should do this radio talk show? Tell us a little bit about that.
Can I go? When I worked at New York Life, I was responsible for hiring 8,000 individual sales agents a year and 125 MBAs from the best schools, and I hated it. But I did have a sign on my office door that was a picture of a turkey with a, do not enter sign in front of it. No turkeys allowed. And I used to say I would much rather be flying with the eagles than on the ground with the turkeys. And I meant that much more deeply than I thought, because we met on the internet on the 17th of August, 2002. We met in person on the last day of, last day of September, yeah. Which was a while. So we had a long time to talk on the phone. We met then, and before we actually met, A, we knew we were going to get married. B, we knew that we were going to be working on some kind of a mission together, and we couldn't wait to meet each other. So we met. We got married on the 27th of November, and then we got married again on the 14th of December, and we got married again on the 5th of January. So we're really, 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 really married. But
I'll give you details later.
once we got to Telluride, which was a little bit after the 14th of December, then we were driving back and forth between Norwood, Colorado, and Telluride, Colorado. And it was a 35-mile drive, an absolutely beautiful drive along the San Juan River, and it was absolutely Colorado. And we had wonderful conversations going back and forth between Telluride, Colorado. And along the way, we began to realize that what we were going to do was something like this in front of audiences and dealing with this kind of subject. And that's about as far as we got. And one day, we were driving along. It was about 8:45 in the morning as the sun was coming up over the mountain, and we were here at 55 miles an hour, and the San Juan River was over here, and the road was just like this. And I looked out the window across Karen, just like this, and I saw, at the same speed we were going, a bald eagle following the river like we were following the road. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, we're already flying with eagles.
It was a sign.
and it was, I get chills just telling that, because we think that what we're doing or what we're trying to do is some kind of a mission that we have been called to do, which is why we love it and why we don't stop doing it, and why we continue to find new and exciting people to deal with and others to reach. So when we started thinking about that, I was the minister at the Presbyterian Church in Telluride, and I had lived in New York for a long time, and I can tell you the exact adult dosage of New York City, Manhattan. The exact adult dosage of Manhattan is 23 years, 18 months, and 14 days. After that, you're done. There is probably an adult dose of being a Presbyterian minister in Telluride as well. But when we got together, and I had been there for 2 years by then, but as we started being together, we realized that we wanted something more. We wanted something that allowed us to be ourselves. And one day, a man by the name of Tom Carnevale, who had a show in Telluride called the Rocky Mountain...
No.
No, Rocky Mountain something. I can't remember right now what it was, but he had this show and he interviewed people. He came to us, he said, I want you all to come over here and let me interview you, and we're going to talk about anger. And I looked at Karen, she looked at me like, well, we know a lot about anger, we don't want to talk about it. He said, no, I want you to. So we go over there, totally open, totally willing to do whatever happened, and when we get there, he gave us stools and he gave us headphones, and he said, now this is what we're going to talk about, and he gave a brief description, and then he put his hand on a switch and he said, now when I flip this on, we're going on the World Wide Web. I'd never even heard of the World Wide Web, except boom, all of a sudden it hit me, we are going around the world. And I thought, this is what we're supposed to do. It was so clear to me that we wanted to have access to the world, and we did it. So we survived the hour-long interview, didn't we?
Yes.
And people came up afterward and talked to us. And that was the beginning of this. And we, tell them what happened next when we went to the station.
Oh, well, so we were talking about it on the way home, and we said, listen, that was fun, and there's got to be more of that out there. There's got to be something else that's to come from this, because we knew it was important. Both of us had had careers where we were in touch with a lot of different facets of the world, and because if you've ever had the opportunity to do that, then you want to share what you know about all the things you know, and so we were talking, we said, we know a lot of people. We could have our own show. And so we made a list, and we talked to the people at the radio station, and they said, well, you can come in and talk to us about it. And so we wrote a proposal, and we went in, we had a list of people, and some of them were Marianne Williamson and Bruce Lipton and
Edgar
Mitchell, and I can't even remember them all because we've been doing this for 20 years, 15 years now. But they looked at the list and they were like, how do you think you can get these people? We went, well, they're friends of ours. I mean, so I don't think they'll tell us no. And they didn't. And so Dr. Larry Dawsey, who's, he was the one who started the medical school program for using the power of prayer in healing. And he was a cardiologist. And I knew Larry when he was in medical school. I was working at the medical school at the time. So we are fortunate enough to have met a lot of really amazing people. And so that's why we care about really talking to everybody we meet, because you don't know what's hidden in that little pocket inside of somebody. I'm looking at this woman over here and the blue sweater, and she looks so much like my dear friend Robin Hunt. Are you related to her in any way? My God, when you walked in the, she passed away a few years ago, but when you walked in the door, I just felt that energy, and I mean, your face looks just like hers. Exactly like her. So, welcome. Sorry to get off the track, but I just have been, I'm sitting here going like this is amazing. So, we don't meet strangers. None of us do. Everybody we meet, if we take the time to find out who they are, you don't know what they have had in their life going on, and the most interesting stories. And sometimes it's not people that are the big famous names like a Marianne Williamson or a Bruce Lipton or even a Joe Dispenza, but we've interviewed all those people, and we've recorded interviews of it on our website. We have the ones that we recorded audio as well as the ones that we have done in video form. So it's a hefty set of interviews, and it's been fun doing it because we got the opportunity to, you know, talk to some of the most incredible minds and some of the most open, loving, caring people, and people like Jean Shinoda Boland, who's in charge of, you know, she's setting up the World Women's Conference right now. So she this is the stuff she does. But one of the greatest gifts and one of the most important people I think we interviewed was Chuck's aunt. And her name was Eleanor Wasson. She was a woman who lived to be 100 years old, but all of her life she committed herself to causes, always. I mean, she started the World Service Organization around the world. She got the funding and arranged for the first Alzheimer's hospital to be built. She was just one of those people. She served on the board at the University of
UCLA.
UCLA, and she was like, everybody knew Eleanor. Everybody knew Eleanor, but it wasn't. And she wasn't. You know, she wasn't somebody that was pompous about who she was, but she just was. She was truly a heart person who everyone she treated with such love and respect. But she was very stern about the things that she did and didn't, you know. At 100 years old, you can be anything. I met her, you know, I figured you stick around that long, you can have an opinion. It is okay. And she was just the most delightful, most incredible woman I've ever met. And I, even in this room, have met some really incredible women because we're out there. We're doing this work. And every one of us has a different gift, and it's about using your own gifts. And because you have them, you have to stand up and use them. God didn't just give them to you just to sit around and twiddle your thumbs with. Really, it's a journey, but it's a wonderful journey, and we've had such fun. Because we have fun. That's who we are. We like each other. And that's nice.
A lot.
And Karen, on that note, I just want to say, Karen just highlighted a person she thought was a great interview. I just want to encourage y'all. There's like 15 years of interviews and audio, including video, of some of the greatest minds in our time that these folks have sat down with. And they've shared their thoughts about humanity and what brings us together as people. How do we shift into this heart energy? And I've been so inspiring just viewing on my own time, just going in and viewing some of these. interviews. So I want to encourage you, if you hadn't done so, what if it really works? What if it really works? Is it .com?
.com.
.com. Yeah,
What
and
if it really works.com.
and then-
I
and
can
then
put
the-
some cards out on the table.
and by the way, we will get to the part about Edgar Mitchell this evening, but if you want to look up the Edgar Mitchell interview that they had on NPR, when you look under the interviews, it's under archive. You'll see 2017, 2016, going back 15 years. Then you see earlier interviews, I think, something like that. And if you click there, I think the very first one that pops up is the Edgar Mitchell interview that they had on NPR. Let me just back up for just a moment, okay? Because what if it really works, and all these great minds that these folks have interviewed is just fascinating. But I'd like to just take a moment, just talk about Karen and Chuck just a little bit, just for the purpose of audience. Now, I just want to say a little bit about Chuck and Karen. Both these folks are they have a very successful career in both the ministry and in business. Chuck mentioned that he was in business. He was with the largest mutual insurance company in the U.S., in New York. I think he was one of the youngest assistant vice president in charge of their marketing program nationwide. And that's probably something he wanted to mention, so I'm just going to say that for him. He also spent 10 years as the Protestant adjunct chaplain at the UN, where he met some really, really amazing people. And he has shared some of those stories with me, and I'm going to ask him to speak a little bit about that as well. And then, of course, you were also involved in the ministry for, I think, 39 years or so.
Or closer to 45 even.
Close to 45 years. So just an amazing, amazing career. Karen, a very successful business person. She owned her own business. She also was very much involved with youth programs and after-school programs up in the Dallas area, where she helped start a nonprofit, I believe, Karen, for after-school kids. So now all this before they even met each other. This is long before they even met. They've had very, very successful careers. And then I think after y'all got together and met back in 2002, it's like a whole new life started, where it was, I think used Chuck's word, it was like you were supercharged. It was like, boom, you're really taking off like a rocket with what if it really works, and so forth. With that said, would you, Chuck and Karen, would you just spend just a couple of moments here relating for us what if it really works into the consciousness movement that espoused by forms like ions and heart maths and so forth. Just speak to that a little bit in terms of how you see what if it really works in this evolving field of consciousness, if you will.
Can I take a shot at that? One of the things that I think a lot about is that the myths exist to tell time. And if you go back, most of the myths somehow or another relate to time. And one of the most obvious to look at that is the myth of the phoenix, where this big, beautiful bird flies for 500 years, and then it lands and builds a nest of cinnamon twigs, gets on the nest catches on fire, the bird dies, and out of the ashes rise another phoenix. Now, this is about a 500-year cycle. And on the 17th of October, just passed, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther putting the 99 Theses on the door of the Church of Wittenberg. And that was the moment when this entire age changed. And if you look back just a little bit, everything that happened between 1480 and 1520, that's 40 years, really set the agenda for what happened for the next 500 years. Not that anybody could see that going forward, but you can see it going backward. And so now we're at one of those defining moments where the agenda for the next 500 years is being introduced. And when you look at the internet compared with the printing press, or you look at Magellan compared with space travel, you begin to see parallels that say, wait a minute, whatever is going on now is like what happened then, but it's not exactly what happened then. So one of the things that I think about is if we think of that period as the Renaissance, or if we think of this 500-year period as, what do we think of it? Anybody know? What would you call the last 500 years? It's okay, it's not important. I'm going to suggest that the next 500 years might be known as the quantum age. Because I think the quantum, which among other things means endless possibilities. If you look with a telescope all the way to the end of the universe and you're looking for galaxies, guess what you'll find? Galaxies and galaxies and galaxies, billions and so possibilities are what this is about. And so anything that I think that we've done fits into the concept, what is the quantum nature of all of this? Karen and I were lucky enough in 2007 and 2008 to write a book, and we call it The Quantum Conspiracy. And you can still get it at Amazon, but it's subtitled A Novel of Possibilities. And we talked about the possibilities of what are going on right now. But that one of the things about the quantum concept is the field. Everybody's familiar with the field, right? This is a field right here. And this field extends to every place that we extend. Being part of the field and recognizing the field and putting things into the field is really important. It's not sort of important, it's really important. And if you doubt that, ask yourself the question, how are we going to get out of this mess that we've gotten ourselves into in this country? And the answer is somehow or another, we're going to have to alter the field so that more and more people say, wait a minute, we need to get together and we need to work together rather than going off in different directions. So the knowledge of the field, which is a quantum concept for sure, is one of the things that we've tried to get people to talk about, and frankly, we demonstrated in our lives. And I want to say something else about that. I was fortunate enough to go to a pretty good graduate school on the East Coast, and it's beautiful scenery. It's spectacular scenery. I went to Princeton, and it's wonderful to be there. But what was exciting was to be with people who were really bright minds. And after a while, when you have that experience, you want more. It's like a drug. You want more of it, because it's a chance to interchange with people and say, you know, is it possible to keep up? But we've had these wonderful experiences. I remember when we first started out, to this moment, I don't know anything about how a soundboard works. I do not understand the concept of a gain. Seems to me like it ought to be volume, right? But no, it's called gain. I don't understand any of that. And so we had to learn some of that, which we never did learn it. But we had to jerry-rig some things. And so we decided we wanted to talk to Rupert Sheldrake. And Rupert Sheldrake was in England. And we had a little Qualcomm phone, one of the first smartphones, a little Qualcomm with a speaker on it. And we went home and we got a recorder and that little phone, and we called Rupert Sheldrake. And I believe that recording is in the archives at our website. But in the process of it, we talked to him about a lot of things, and we asked him about space travel. And we wound up, what he said to us, we wound up putting in as the first part of our book. He said, "It seems rather odd to me that we are using our treasure to build machines to go to the solar system, when if we really worked at it, we could use our minds and our consciousness to go and explore the entire universe." Now, and when I said that, it made perfectly good sense to me. When he said it, I thought, well, yeah, of course, why not? But it's a big concept. Am I making sense to everybody so far? So We've been married for 15 years, and it's like we were married yesterday afternoon, and we just have so much fun together. But one of the things that happens to us is that when we get together with these people, magic things happen. I want to tell them about the trip to Gamble's house.
Oh, yeah. Kimberly and Foster Gamble, who are the people who started the Thrive movement.
And made the movie,
And
the
made
Thrive
the
movie.
The Thrive movement. And Kimberly wrote the script for the entire thing. She's incredible. But Foster's a Procter & Gamble family member. But they call us, so we'd made a particular trip to California, and we call it our California Dreamin' Trip, and we went everywhere around San Francisco and to all the people that we wanted to interview who were in that area, because it is like a school of wisdom and knowledge, and anything you could ever hope to know, you can find there. We went to the Ion's office and interviewed Dean Radin, we flew Tom Campbell in, and Tom Campbell's the person who wrote My Big Toe, and we had already done like a full day of interviewing with Tom Campbell at his home in Alabama, and so we said, God, we got to put you together with Dean. And you together with Bruce Lipton, and Bruce lives in that area as well. So we made all the arrangements, and Tom flew in and met us, and we went to Dean, we went to Bruce's house, and just magical things happened. I don't think it's us that's the magic. I think it's the coming together of all the energy with the intention.
In the field.
And that's what makes it so magical.
You know,
But it is magical. I don't know how to describe it any other way.
Karen, if I may just interject for just a moment here. I've seen that interview from your website, and it's such an inspiration. A very short interview, by the way, very inspirational. These two gentlemen had never met before. I mean, the two icons.
Tom Campbell and
their
Bruce
field.
Lipton.
Yeah.
And when you see these two gentlemen getting together, it's like, it was obvious, it's two kindred spirits. Okay? And you could just see the spark in their eyes. And they spoke about ultimately what's important. They just got right down to it, right? Ultimately, what's important. But all the challenges we have on this planet is so simple. They said it was love.
Yeah.
That's what's important. And I bet I've seen that 4 or 5 times because I find it to be, it captures my imagination. It's just so powerful. But there's a lot of interviews like that, and I was going to ask you how that interview came about, so I appreciate you explaining that to us.
Yeah, well, and so that's also how the Gamble interview came about. We'd been trying to get hold of Kimberly and Foster, but they'd been traveling. And so we got to Santa Cruz, and we still had not reached them. Well, we got invited Paul Hubbard, who does music here. He plays the drums, plays the singing bowls. Paul had a friend that was out in that area, and he said, "You really need to meet my friend while you're out there." So we called a guy, and he said, "Well, I'm going to have a gathering while y'all are here. Why don't you come to the house?" So we went there. Come to find out, Foster is a member of that group that goes to his house. And they had just gotten back from traveling. And so the last night we were there, we got the opportunity to interview Kimberly and Foster Campbell. And we tried, but trying didn't do it. It was like when God said it's time for this to come together, it just came together. And so they told us ahead of time, Now, we're gonna eat dinner before y'all come, because we were scheduled it for 6 o'clock, because we had other interviews all day long. And so, and we said, well, that's fine. So we went at 6. They came out, here are these lovely people. They come out to the car and they helped us bring all our gear in. And I mean, you know, they were our guests, but we were their guests, and they treated us with such sweetness. So we start interviewing, and come to find out, Foster knows Eleanor, his aunt, and Kimberly knew Eleanor in Los Angeles, and Foster knew her from Santa Cruz, working at the university on the board. And so here were, you know, the connections that we have with people that we don't have a clue that we have with them.
The field.
The field. But we sat and we talked. I mean, we really were able to have a lovely interview with them. Then afterward, Kimberly came in and she said, well, we're just going to have dinner right now. Would y'all like to join us? And we said, well, yeah, sure we would. It was a full moon.
Over Monterey Bay.
Over Monterey Bay.
On Monterey Bay, and we were way up on the mountain looking at it.
It was a lovely evening. It was a beautiful setting, but it was like all of our hearts. Here we were, people who didn't know each other an hour earlier, and our hearts were just joined. All of a sudden, you know, Foster looks over at me and he said, I remember you from the pyramids. And I was like, well, guess what? You know, that was a whole nother situation. And Chuck's sitting there with his mouth open and he's saying, Eleanor, his aunt whispers in his ear from time to time. She said, don't say a word, just don't say a word. Just, you know. So we get feedback from other places anyway, you know, and so to have that opportunity to talk to these people who care so much about what happens in the world, that they have a movement which is called the Thrive Movement, where anybody who has a gift, who has an idea about how to solve any issue can plug into that, because it's like this big wheel and people plug in, and then you've got, instead of one person working to try to make something happen, you've got a whole group of people who are trying to make that similar thing happen, and they can come and work together, and it's just much more productive. But they were smart enough to figure that out, and they were just wonderful people, really wonderful people. So, you know, it's a real blessing that we get to do this.
Yeah, and one of the things that Karen's describing, and you've probably had the same experience yourself, but when you see it, when you experience it over and over again, you begin to think, wait a minute, there's something much bigger going on. We get in the car in Whitney, Texas, where we lived at one point, and we head off on one of these trips. It was in Austin, wasn't it? Right. And we were going to go from here to Denver, to Missouri, to Memphis, to Huntsville, Alabama, to Asheville, North Carolina, to Stamford, Connecticut, and home.
New York City.
New York City.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when we got in the car, it's as if we get into a bubble. And Kimberly and Procter Gamble said the exact same thing in the interview. You'll hear them say it. We get in the car and we're in a bubble. And all of a sudden, everything, the right stuff happens. So much so that I long for those experiences, because you know you're in the flow. It's just being in the flow is it's magic. And so that leads us to think that we're doing some kind of a mission, and I don't think I could even define what the mission is at this point, other than this is what we've been doing. And we don't know where it's going. But we're not going to quit until it's over. And I'll tell you a story about my aunt. She was a remarkable woman. She knew everybody in California, and I heard people say that, and I thought, oh, come on. So I was supposed to go into the governor's office one day, and before I went, she said, "Oh, by the way, tell the governor I said hello." And I thought, "Oh, sure." So I walked in the governor's office, and the second thing I said was, "Oh, by the way, Governor, my aunt wanted to say hello to you." He says, "Oh, who's your aunt?" I said, "Eleanor Boston." "Oh, Eleanor!" It was like that. So she knew everybody. But in the process, we find that the connections that occur are spectacular. And we're somehow or another, what we're doing is bringing something together that doesn't exist. And boy, it's so important to do this. One of the things, somebody we met that was so much like that, who was it? Something that happened. I give up. Don't worry about it.
I don't know, we've met so many people.
Yeah. But the people come to us, and they bring us the most wonderful things. Joe Dispenza, who Janet
studies
knows.
with, yeah.
Joe Dispenza has been in our living room 3 times now, and we've interviewed him. And he's profound. And this is somebody that's really making a big difference in the world. Not that that's special, but to be able to hear that and to relate to that is part of what we think we're giving to the people who view what we're doing. And so, what's the next question?
Well, we're lucky because we have, you know, when I call people, they just say yes. They're not, you know, I mean, initially, the people we were interviewing were people that were our friends. And then all of a sudden, it was people that we didn't know. And yet somehow, they wanted to do it. It felt important to them too.
Well, you know, let me say something on that note, Karen. When I met Chuck and Karen, it's been a couple years back now, we were at an INAX meeting, in which, oh, by the way, I meant to say this at the beginning. Bob Price, our cameraman, is the president of INAX, the Institute of Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies. So we were at Bob's event, and it just so happened that his speakers that evening were Karen and Chuck, and we didn't know anybody in that room when we walked in. It was our first INAX meeting, and so we walked in. We got there early. Karen and Chuck were sitting there getting ready to do their talk, and so we heard what they had to say about what if it really works. And I don't know, a couple hours later when everything was done and we walked out, I got in the car and we started driving home, and I turned to my wife and I said, you know, there's something special about these people. I don't know what it is, but there's really something special about this Chuck and Karen Robison. And my wife said, you know, I really feel the same way. You know, even though we don't know these folks, there's something special. And I think it was like a week or so later, I get a phone call from Chuck, and he said the same thing. So I'm not quite sure why he would say that to me, but he said the same thing. He said, we really would like to get to know you and Lynn. And I said, well, we're delighted. We would love to get to know y'all because we know you're special. But let me walk back for just a moment. Let's go back to New York. Chuck, in your years in New York, you got to know a lot of people.
Yes, I do.
You got to know a lot of movers and shakers that were big honchos in New York. You got to know major world leaders at the UN. Okay, and I know in one way or another, many of those folks had influences on your life. And of all the people you met, if I could ask you, if there was one person that left an indelible mark on your life that was a big influencer in your life, who might that person be?
And I have that answer. Karen and I have both been fortunate enough to have teachers for 40 years, 30 years. Her teacher is 95, my teacher is 92, they're still alive. We still go to them for answers. They give us the right answers. We pay attention. And so I don't know how that happened, but both of us have these great teachers. My teacher was Gene Kiefer. And Gene is the publicist and editor and confidant and friend of Gopi Krishna. I don't know whether that name rings a bell to you or not, but Gopi Krishna was the only person in the last century that wrote about his Kundalini experience of enlightenment throughout the whole process, which was a 17-year period, and then the rest of his life was enlightened in the English language. And I had worked with Gene since 1980, and then in 1983, the Hopi Indians invited Gopi Krishna to come to New York to address the United Nations with them. It's an interesting story. Since the United Nations was founded, the Hopi Indians had been petitioning the United Nations to listen to their prophecy. 1947, 1964, and then the third time was 1983. And the United States says we're not having that. So the Hopi said, well, we have been told we have to get this out, so we're going to have our presentation of our prophecy at the United Nations in the lobby of the main building on an evening, and 500 people stood up in that lobby and listened to the chief of the Hopi Indians tell about the prophecy, which is not necessarily a really happy prophecy. And then they invited Gopi Krishna to create a presentation about the evolutionary power in man, which is the Kundalini power. Well, when I look back on it, I think, how did it happen that I was there? I mean, it was truly a historic moment if you got the deal. So Gene Kiefer had an apartment on West 36th Street, in an apartment they used to call the Fertile Crescent. And he said, why don't you come over to my apartment, and Gopi Krishna is staying there, and you can photograph him. And I was doing portrait photography, among a couple of other things that I did. So I went out to the Fertile Crescent, and I spent an hour alone with Gopi Krishna in a room. He was 83 at the time. And this was not a guru from India. This was a genuinely enlightened man. He didn't sit on daises and with flowers. He didn't have adoring admirers. He wrote 13 books. He traveled all over the world. He learned 7 languages on his own as a result of the evolutionary shift that took place when he had this Kundalini experience, and his nervous system was rewired. But he was just this kind, gentle man. So I'm sitting there taking pictures. I took 6 rolls of film, and I thought, surely I've got one of them that's good. So I put my camera down, turned off the lights, and I was sitting about as far away as I am from you. And I said, and I had this one prepared question. I said, Gopi Krishna, what do I need to do to be enlightened? And I thought that he would say, well, wear an orange cap, or repeat a mantra, or change your name, or, do something like that. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, just this: every day, as often as you can, just think about God, and God will take care of everything else. And I thought, ooh. I went back to my dark room, and I was in there for 3 days with those pictures. And while I was there, I thought about what he'd said to me, and I realized that's something I could do. I've got a degree in theology, and I understand all that complexity, but this is something that was realistic, practical, down to earth, that I could do. And during that 3-day period, I decided, okay, I'm going to do that. And I have done that now for, I think it's 35, or it's close to 40 years, whatever it is, to be closer to exact. And I have done that. And I can tell you, without even the slightest hesitation, that if you choose to do what I'm going to tell you, it will make a difference, and it will start right this minute. What I do is, as often as I can, every day, I just think about God. Now, given there's not a chance in hell or heaven that I will ever understand what God is, but I can think about him all the time. And it doesn't make any difference what you think. What's his favorite cocktail? Is it is it, as I suspect, a dirty martini? or does he have a glass house too? What kind of a yacht does he have? Who are his pals? You can think about, it doesn't make any difference what you think about God. The fact that you're thinking about this presence that you know to be there, somehow or another makes a difference. And it made a difference to me. That's the most important thing that's happened in the whole thing. That moment when I heard that my life just went, and away I went. I hope does that make sense to anybody? Makes great sense to me.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Appreciate you sharing that with us. Well, on that note, I'd like to turn our discussion to Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the founder of IONS. And I know you've met with Dr. Mitchell over the years a number of times. You also had an interview with him, you and Karen, on the radio, NPR radio, back when y'all were in Telluride. And I heard that interview when I looked on the website. Absolutely fascinating interview. Really, really was. But there was a lot more than what we heard on the tape,
Yeah.
I'm sure. And so I'd like to ask Chuck and Karen if you could give us a sense, give us a perspective of how that interview came about, number one, and also share with us in your own words what Dr. Mitchell had to share about that voyage. I mean, I can remember what he said, but I'd like to hear from y'all about what he said about that voyage, particularly when Apollo 14 went to the moon. He walked on the moon, they got back on, and they came back to Earth. And it was that voyage back to Earth that changed his life, that ultimately ended up with this organization, IONS, which he started, which, I mean, I could listen to that over and over. It was such an inspirational talk that he gave, because keep in mind, we're talking about a scientist PhD that did a complete shift. It happened on that voyage. Absolutely an amazing story. Would you kindly share that story with us?
Well, Gene Kiefer, my teacher, has this beautiful estate on Wallach's Point off of the coast of Stamford, Connecticut, and he has his own beach and a beautiful house and the rest of it. And so he had an advertising agency in New York, and he worked with people, and his mind would never stop. And so
And still hasn't.
And he got Klaus Nobel of the Nobel family together, and with Roichi Sasakawa, who was the chairman of the Japan Shipbuilding Industry Foundation, and some other people, and they were going to change the world a little bit. And so they got together at Gene's house on a summer day, and it was cloudy, it was a beautiful day, and they invited Edgar Mitchell there to talk to them about what could be done, and especially as it related to IONS and what he had created with this organization. And so there were 8 of us that were sitting around Gene's porch, and somehow or another somebody said, well, what happened to you on the way back? And he told this wonderful story. And here's what he said. While they were on the moon, everything was so regimented and so precise in the timing allotted that they had a total of 5 minutes that were unassigned, but they were not contiguous minutes. They were 2 seconds here, 3 seconds there. So there wasn't a lot of time to think at all. And so finally they get in the lander that goes back up to the command module, and they're getting ready, they connect with that, and then they're getting ready to blast off for Earth. They leave a translunar orbit and they head to Earth. And when they do, they put the capsule in what's called barbecue mode. And it was constantly rotating to keep the surface equally heated all the way around. If you've ever seen that capsule, there is a window that's probably not much bigger than this. And if you were the command pilot who had access to that window, you were probably about this close to that wind. It was in your nose. So he told the story of being in that, and they blast off from the moon orbit, and they head toward Earth, and all of a sudden he's looking out there, and because they're moving like this, the Earth he's twisting around the Earth. And he said, all of a sudden I breathed out, and I was outside the space capsule. And I could see all the stars, everything out there. He says, I breathed back in, and I was in the jungle in Bangladesh, and there was a flood. I breathed back, and I was back out in the stars. I breathed in, and I was in the middle, on the streets of Harlem, and somebody was about to mug me. I breathed out, and I was in the stars. I breathed in, and I was at Vietnam, and people were shooting me. It was 1979, 72. He said, and he said, what happened was that it didn't stop. He said, I realized that I was probably going crazy. He said, this goes on the whole time. And the Earth got bigger and bigger, but it was just going like this, and his mind was going boom, 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 boom. And he said to himself, if I ever get back to Earth, and if I get back safely, as soon as I put my foot on the deck of that aircraft carrier, I'm going to resign my commission and find out what is this experience that I'm having. And that was actually the beginning of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And he put it together. When I met him, it had been in place for maybe 5 or 6 years, and there were people that were funding him. John Temple was one of them, and there was others. But it was an important thing that he did, and yet at the same time, because it's an organization and different people were involved, it really didn't take off until he got old enough to pull back and just let go of it. And that's when it started to become even more important. But this organization that you're listening through Joe about and to is an important effort to wake people up to what we brought back from space. And by the way, if you ever have a chance to see a movie that was made by 2 people here at the University of Texas who went down to Houston and looked at 70,000 feet of the astronauts' own home movies with a little 8mm camera that they took on all the trips to the moon. The name of the movie they made was For All Mankind. And at the end, each one of them talks about their experience on the moon. And they talk about there was no time to think. And then they talk about looking at Earth from the moon when there was a second to do it. And they said they felt us communicating with them across 225,000 miles, as if they were in the room next door. So it's important that we know these things. To me, it's important because there are so many things that are geared to convince us that we are insignificant. But the truth is, we are massively significant, and not one of us, but all of us. And we have all kinds of things we can do to make things happen, and we are being called upon to do that right now. This is a very important time we're in. I want to tell you just one more story. Can I do this? We had, in our church in Telluride, we had a wonderful couple. He was Armenian, and she was the daughter of a black Baptist preacher from Los Angeles. Beautiful couple. She was a model. She was a Ralph Lauren model, and he was a trader with China. I mean, they were just an interesting couple, and they had 3 kids. One of them, John, the oldest, clearly was destined to something. And he came to me at a certain point, and he said, I'd like to be baptized. And I thought, that doesn't happen every day. So I talked to him, and I baptized him in the church. Next thing I know, we arranged for Karen knew Arun Gandhi. And Arun Gandhi was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. And he had spent his 13th and 14 years in India with Mahatma Gandhi. And upon his return here, he had founded, among other things, the month of
The global awareness, peace. I can't
the
think of it.
season of
Season of
nonviolence.
Nonviolence, yeah.
Is what it's called. So John let it be known that his hero was Mahatma Gandhi. Well, it just so happened that we were going to interview Maroon Gandhi. So his mother said, you know, Johnny would love to be able to be in on that interview. And we said, well, sure, we can work that out. Well, just bring him on in. We can sit there and listen to it. Unbeknownst to us, he had gone to school and asked his fellow students, if I had a chance to ask this guy a question, what questions should I ask? And
He took a vote.
they gave him several questions, and they took a vote. So we go into the interview,
Amazing.
and here we are in this little radio station in Telluride, Colorado, and we're talking to Arun Gandhi over the phone. And we're calling his house, and he was like 66, 67, something at that point. It turned out, unbeknownst to us, that his wife was sick. Somebody was a housekeeper, and they were vacuuming the floor. The noise and the commotion that was going on back there, I was thinking, what are we doing here? And it was hard to understand him because he had a little bit of an accent. So we get through most of it, and then 2/3 of the way through, Karen says,
Arun, we have a young man here who your grandfather is his idol, and he'd like to ask you a question. Would that be all right? And he said, well, certainly. And the next thing we know, Jonathan, I've introduced him, and Jonathan asked his question, and I don't remember what the question was, but the answer was not coming back from Arun. It was Mahatma Gandhi answering that question that child had asked, and he was. We thought at the time we looked at each other.
We
were
thought
like,
we knew what was happening.
We thought we knew what was happening.
Instantly, all the noise in the background just stopped. It was just
Nothing. There was
totally
nothing.
quiet. And here was this answer coming
Yes.
from this voice on the other end of the phone that you just said, oh no, this just doesn't connect the way it quite should. In Telluride, this radio station was the thing everybody listened to. You go from one store to the next all the time, and it would be the same song in the next store that it was. So everybody listened to it. So we are listening to this, and we're hearing this, and we both knew that there was something very special going on. And we looked at each other and thought, wow, this is amazing. It wasn't until we left the station, we started walking down the street, that people said, what happened there?
They could sense it. They could sense it too, even though they weren't right there in the studio with us. It was amazing. They said, that wasn't a that sounded like Mahatma Gandhi. And sure enough, I believe that it was. You know, it's kind of a little woo-woo for some people, but see, we kind of live a life that does that from time to time. So there we were, and here was this young man getting to talk to
his hero.
His hero,
Yeah.
you know. And this kid, oh my God, he's grown up now. You know, he's in college, and he's just so wonderful. He's just this, you know, you knew he would be, you know, when he's little. The other brothers were lovely kids too, but there was just a you know, a special gift this one young man had, and he hadn't changed. He's just magnificent, and the other boys are wonderful too. But you know, that was the experience with Jonathan, and everybody in town was like, whoa, because people listen to the radio and tell you know, because it is like that. There's only one station.
And there's something we've learned from experiences like that I think is important to remind ourselves of and to share with you. I spent 23 years in New York City. I am not unaccustomed to being pushy and aggressive and arrogant and fighting for my own way. That's how you do it in New York. And I learned how to make things happen there. But what we've learned in this process is, it's like what that phrase from the Course in Miracles, I need do nothing. The stuff that's important to us, that's going to happen, that's going to make a difference, it's coming at us. All we have to do is relax, get out of the way, and don't fight it. And I'm not talking about just us, I'm talking about all of us. It's a major lesson that we've learned. And what we discover is that as we release all these things that we'd like to have happen, like to see happen, blah, 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 and just accept what's coming, look at how much fun we're having. I'm sure that's true for all of us. It's not just us. We're grateful. And that's another thing. No, one of the things we did, and you'll see this in the interviews, we ask everybody, there were a couple of cases when we just forgot it, but we've asked everybody, if you could tell our viewers one thing that they could do right now that would improve their spiritual growth, what would it be? And with one exception, everybody, scientists, philosophers, geniuses, whatever it is, all the people we've interviewed, they all had the same answer. It's awesome when you hear it. They all say, the place to begin is with gratitude. Lord, that's what they said. We couldn't have scripted it. So there's a secret that they're sharing with us. Gratitude, oh boy, let me tell you, we have a world to be grateful for, and we know it. And we know that that's important as part of all of our spiritual experience.
And we're grateful to be here tonight, and we're
Well, thank
grateful
you
for
so
you,
much.
Joe,
Yeah.
for allowing us to share our stories.
And Joe, and before he says another word, I want you to know that this man has been flat on his back, really, really ill for the last 8 days. And he made a heroic effort to be here tonight, put up all the furniture and the rest of it, and he made this happen. And we want you to know we're grateful for that, Joe.
Well, thank you. It's just been my honor to have y'all as our guests. I think one of the last questions I wanted to ask Chuck and Karen this evening was, that question would have been, what do you envision for what if it really works? But I think you really answered that question in that, you know, by just allowing ourselves to be in the field, okay, and to let the Spirit or Creator direct and guide us, we call it in the flow. We've all heard that term, and I'm sure each one of us in this room have been in that space where we're in the flow, where everything that's supposed to happen happens. The people that we need to have walk in our lives, they walk into our lives, whether it be personal or professional. It happens that way. And I know I've had a lot of experiences like that over the last 2 years since I met Chuck and Karen, and so I am talking about gratitude. I am so grateful that I am fortunate enough to be able to say that Chuck and Karen Robison are two of my most dearest friends. So thank you this evening for being our guests. And I'm sure you have enjoyed this discussion with these two as much as I have. And I'd like to, if you will, at this point, we have some questions for Chuck and Karen. We have some time, so feel free to ask your questions.
About the quantum field, I'm familiar with it, but I'm also familiar with it based on a number of different authors and different viewpoints, so I just kind of wanted to hear what yours was. I'm an avid follower of Dr. Joe's. I'm going to his workshop this weekend again. I'm in a meditation group, and I've read all his books, but I've also, so I understand how he views the field.
Yes.
It's the area of infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
Everything that can happen is there.
Yeah.
We just need to connect with it.
Yeah.
Other people, like Abraham, say that once you think something, it becomes reality out there. And we just need to create a vibration that will bring it into our reality. And you said we need to change it. We need to change or add to the field. So it sounds like you're kind of in the second thought or second area of thought where it's constantly growing. Our thoughts affect, or our consciousness affects the field, or generates new things in the field. Is that right?
Yes, and we're all part of that, but when I said that, and this is going to be, I run the risk of maybe offending somebody, and if that's the case, so be it.
Well, I can't offend
But-
me, so go for it.
This is one of the problems we're having right now. We understand, like I just said, let it come to us. But at the same time, we're living in a situation in this country where we're having the equivalent of a national nervous breakdown. People are living it with dread every day. What's happening? What's coming? And it feels like it's completely out of control. And yet, I, for one, ask myself every day, what can I do to help us get back together? And every once in a while, this terrible nightmare hits me and says, we're not going to get back together. And Toynbee said that there has never been an empire or a civilization that went from its beginning to its peak in only 250 years. But it's also true that there has never been an empire that once it began to decline, ever recovered. And that's a question that we're asking ourselves. And I think we can change that. I think we can in fact, it's
in the field.
It's in the field, and this
It's possible.
may be the most creative moment in all of American history. But there are moments when it doesn't look anything like that to me. And I don't know how to solve that. I'd like to. I feel that in my bones.
Well, one of the things that we experienced when we were writing the book, The Quantum Conspiracy, is people say, well, how did y'all write that together? Well, because we set an intention for what we were going to do. And then each day, we said, this is what we think needs to be here. And then
And we didn't have an outline. We didn't have a list of characters. We didn't know a beginning, a middle, and an end. We just started writing.
And he started writing. I do the editing. We talk about it and see, is that really what we want to say, or is there something else we want to do with that particular part? But one of the things that we found in doing the book was the fact that at the end we came to a place that offered solutions. And it was about bringing in, like, how do you feed the world that is not being fed? It's the same kind of stuff that Kimberly and Foster have looked at in this Thrive movement. But we meet Joe, and he's just this guy who all his life he knew how to manage things all over the world. Move it here, move it there, make, set up. And you never know who you're going to meet, who does what. But we're not in here by accident. We are together because we all have a little gift that we can share with each other. And as long as we open up our mouths and say what we can do, or say what we feel strongly about, then we can start to work together to make it happen. If everybody just sits back and is polite, and I don't have to worry about Chuck speaking his mind about anything, because he's more than happy to share how he feels. It's a very important thing, but that's what I love. I love the fact that he will stand up and say his truth. And he makes me stronger to do it as well. So.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir.
It comes to me that the majority of Gopi Krishna's journey was turbulence, which tells you it's a good example that turbulence can lead somewhere if it's directed, if you can follow that direction. And it's disturbing to a lot of people to read his stuff because the majority of his journey was turbulent.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
Yes, and I got a chance to speak to him about that. He he had to be very careful with every bite of food he took because it had to be the exact right food, the right way, and he wasn't neurotic about it. He got sick if it was the wrong thing. There were times when he writhed in pain at night and couldn't sleep. It was a nightmare. And he went on to explain in his writings that these two channels of energy that go up and down, go up the spine, which are like the caduceus that you see in the doctor's, the caduceus, that's what those snakes mean on that caduceus, that they are the energy going up the spine. But he says it's a very dangerous path to want to take because there are great risks that if you're not taking care of yourself and being taken care of. Gopi Krishna said he had an arranged marriage, and he was from Kashmir, and his marriage was arranged. And he later told Jean, he said, "My marriage was arranged, and when I saw the girl that I was going to be married," he said, "my heart sank because she was just so homely." He said, "But God sent her to me because she was the one person that could take care of me through this incredible, dangerous journey that he took." But when he got through it and his nervous system was rewired, he said to me, he said, "Everything I see is through I'm looking through a pearlescent haze at everything. It's all glowing. There's a glowing pearlescent haze of everything I see." And it was his definition of what it means to see this world from a different experience.
If that parallels society, then it's not just a one direction downward, so to speak.
Right, I'm sure you've read it, but if you haven't, his book, Living with Kundalini, which is his autobiography, which is published posthumously 10 years after he died, explains all that. Living with Kundalini, it's the Shambhala Press edition. And he talks about this experience. Fortunately, I haven't been bothered with having a Kundalini experience. That's something that's escaped me because it's very frightening. And when you hear people throw that word around Kundalini so casually, they don't really know what they're talking about. There's yoga, period. There's not Kundalini yoga, there's yoga. Kundalini is an entirely different, as you know, an entirely different experience.
I think that Jean is going to send us a box of Gopi Krishna's books. So, isn't that what he told us
Yeah,
he was
I
going to
believe
do?
that- yes, it
the
is.
other day when we
Yeah.
talked to him. We talked to him several times a week, and he said, "I'm going to send them to you, and you can give them to people who are interested in knowing about this."
Yeah.
So we'll have them at our next, if Jean gets them here, depending on the Christmas thing, our next scheduled meeting for What If It Really Works is going to be January what'd you say, the 4th? And so that's the first Thursday in January. And we'll bring those books then if you're interested if there's something there that you haven't seen yet. And if anybody's interested in having one. They're really, they're deep reading. They're deep. So but if you're a student of it, you really realize, but if you're ready for it, then you understand it. It'll, it's just there. So, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Anybody else?
I appreciate it.
Anybody else? Can I?
Thank you so much. I just want to say, so January 4th is the What If It Really Works on a Thursday.
In this room.
The guest again will be Dr. Ruth Miller. Have we heard from Dr. Miller as to what her topic would be that?
No, we're going to interview her.
To interview her.
See, if Ruth normally comes and talks, but this time we're going to interview her because now we know a lot about her. And she's an incredible person,
Yeah.
really incredible.
And she has a slant on things that's really remarkable. You will not
Be
want,
disappointed.
you won't be disappointed. That's
You
right.
will not be disappointed.
Can I just say one other thing?
Sure, go ahead.
This has been so much fun. We have interviewed people, as you know, like this, one-on-one. But when we find that we have a group of people to share what we're talking about, the energy ramps up all by itself. And it gets better. Together, we make things better. Together, we make things happen. Together, we go places we could never go alone. And that's what we're learning, and that's why we have now turned our focus to interviewing people in an audience like this, because boom, 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 things happen that normally would not happen. Not that things one-on-one are not happening. But so, I want to say for me, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to ask for maybe a story of a time when you felt like you realized that you were getting in your own way. You said that that you realized you don't need to do anything and to be receptive. Can you talk about one of those times when either of you, where you did that transition of getting out of your own way and opening up and
Yeah, there was a brief period in my life that was like that. It went from 1942 until about 1990. I could tell you lots of experiences, I guess, if I had time to think about it, and Karen is going to answer that as well. But what I was pretty sure I knew what I wanted, and I knew how to make it happen, and I tried to make it happen, and invariably it was never as good as the stuff that happened on its own. And I can't. In 2000, knew it was time to leave New York. And for 20 years, I had been trying to get the Presbyterian Church in Taos, New Mexico. I'd done everything I could to wire that. Everything. And the man that was there every year said he was going to retire, and I thought, okay, this is going to be the year. Finally, I went to a person who was a vision person, a coach, and I said, I want to go to the West. I want to live in an art community. I want to have a church, and I want to be a contributing member of that community, and I want it to be Taos, New Mexico. She says, whatever you do, don't change that vision. Keep it just like that. But at the end of it, add one sentence. This or something better. About 2 weeks after I put that on there was an ad in one of the preachers' magazines about a little church in Telluride that was vacant. And I had, 2 months before that, I'd spent an evening with Peter Yarrow, Peter, Paul, and Mary, photographing him and his daughter. And he said, I have a house in Telluride. So I called Peter and I said, and they said, well, he's in Japan. He'll be back for a couple weeks. I said, would you please have me call me? So a couple weeks later, I knew this thing was going on in Telluride. He called me and he said, I'm on the Metroliner. What's up? I said, well, the church in Telluride is looking for a preacher. And he had a house right up on the hill. He said, well, who's the person that's doing the hiring? I said, I gave him the name. He said, well, let me call you. Bang. Off goes the Metroliner on to Washington. About 45 minutes later, he called me back and he said, I talked to Pete Johnson. I think you're going to be hearing from him. About 5 minutes later, Pete Johnson calls and said, I just talked to Peter Yarrow. How soon can you come out here for an interview? I said, well, I can be there Tuesday. He said, fine. The airplane ticket's on its way. That was all I had to do. It was like just blowing on the door, and it opened. And here's what happened. Peter Yarrow said to Pete Johnson, I understand you're looking for a preacher. And he says, I'm a Jew, and this is none of my business. But Chuck Robison is the perfect person for that job. Took 20 years to try to get there, and it was as simple as letting go and being open to this or something better. And I think that's probably true in life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that.
Thank you so much, Karen and Chuck.
Thank you. Thank
Joe, thank you again. Bless you. This has been great fun.
Welcome. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate y'all being here. We'll see you in the new year, and between now and then, happy holidays.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.